The cold, sterile air of the space station gnawed at Ryra's lavender skin as she sprinted down its labyrinthine corridors. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each step a frantic beat of desperation. She wasn't just running, she was hunted prey. The metallic floor beneath her reverberated with the ominous rhythm of pursuing footsteps, vibrations that sent terror coursing through her veins. They're getting closer, she thought, adrenaline flooding her system. These weren't ordinary bounty hunters. They were the syndicates from Dranik 4, notorious for their mercilessness. Rumors spoke of their savage hunts, turning living beings into trophies. And now, Ryra was their prize. She stumbled, her three-toed foot catching on the lip of a bulkhead door. Pain lanced through her leg, but she gritted her teeth and pushed forward. Stopping now would mean death. Sweat slicked her elongated ears as they twitched, desperately seeking any sound of movement. Focus. She had to stay ahead. Ryra was no warrior. A scholar, a refugee from a planet decimated by relentless war, she and her people were scattered across the galaxy, mere shadows of a lost civilization. She skidded around a corner and spotted a shadowed alcove hidden behind a massive support pillar. Please, let this be enough. With a surge of desperation, she ducked into the alcove, pressing her back against the frigid metal wall. Her breath came in shallow, rapid gasps, and she willed herself to be still, to disappear. Yet fear coursed through her, her body temperature betraying her despite her best efforts. The Syndicate's technology could trace even the faintest heat signature. Think of the stories, she reminded herself, shivers running down her spine. Tales of humans, savage warriors roaming the outer rim, born from Earth's apocalyptic ashes, stripped of empathy and driven by violence. They weren't bedtime stories but real warnings, grim reminders of how brutal humanity could be. Suddenly, the heavy footsteps grew louder, echoing ominously through the corridor. Ryra's heart pounded faster, a caged bird in her chest. The syndicates were here. Her muscles tensed as she prepared for the inevitable. Then, she heard something else. A noise closer, softer, a mere whisper of movement. She wasn't alone. Her amber eyes strained to adjust to the gloom. A massive figure loomed nearby, barely visible in the shadows. A human. Dread pooled in her gut, colder than the metal pressing into her back. He was armored, though not with the sleek technology of most species. His gear was rough, battle-worn, jagged edges bearing dark stains that Ryra instinctively knew weren't oil. This is it. The words formed a silent scream in her mind. If the syndicates didn't kill her, this human certainly would. Frozen, she could do nothing but watch as he stood there, unmoving, his helmeted gaze locked onto hers. Each moment stretched into an eternity, the silence between them thicker than the station's recycled air. Was he waiting, toying with her? Run. Her instincts screamed, but fear cemented her legs in place. And then, to her shock, he spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, undeniably human. They're coming for you. No malice. No cruel delight. Just a simple, grim statement. Ryra's confusion deepened. Why wasn't he attacking? Was this some kind of twisted human game, a prelude to betrayal? Before she could process, he moved, a blur of surprising speed. She flinched, bracing for the worst, expecting pain. Instead, he grabbed her arm, not to harm but to pull her deeper into the shadows. His grip was strong but not harsh. "Stay quiet," he commanded, his voice rough but calm. Shock swallowed Ryra's fear. Too stunned to resist, she obeyed. The heavy footsteps of the syndicates thundered closer, their guttural voices carrying curses and frustration. But they kept moving, their quarry hidden by some advanced cloaking field the human had activated. A field masking their very existence. Minutes crawled by, stretching into what felt like hours. Finally, the footsteps faded. Ryra exhaled shakily, her body sagging in relief. The human released her arm and stepped back, his form still a massive protective presence between her and the corridor. Why had he saved her? This was a human, a creature she had been taught to fear. Yet, he had kept her safe. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He removed his helmet, revealing a face marked by battles, his eyes sharp and piercing. He looked at her for a long moment. "Not all humans are monsters," he said, his tone carrying an unexpected gentleness. Before she could question him further, gunfire erupted somewhere in the station, echoing through the metal walls. The syndicates weren't done searching. "We need to move," he said, urgency hardening his expression. "If you want to survive, follow me." Ryra's instincts battled within her, terror screaming at her to run from this human, yet a strange, fragile trust rooted in his actions. In the end, with no other choice, she followed him into the dark, her mind swirling with disbelief and questions she couldn't answer. Jackson sat on one of the shuttle benches, meticulously cleaning his weapon. Each movement was precise, efficient, the same quiet discipline he had shown in battle. His helmet lay beside him, revealing a face carved by time and hardship. Rugged features etched with scars spoke of survival, of violence endured and inflicted. Yet, there was a calmness in his demeanor, an eerie contrast to the ruthless efficiency Ryra had just witnessed. Ryra swallowed, the silence between them thick and uneasy. She cleared her throat, breaking the tension. "You never told me your name." Jackson didn't look up immediately. He paused, his hands stilling for a brief moment, then turned his gaze toward her. "Jackson," he said simply, then returned to his task. "Jackson," Ryra echoed, tasting the unfamiliar name. It felt surprisingly gentle for a human, these so-called bloodthirsty warriors of legend. She had expected something harsh, something that matched the monstrous image of humans her people had painted in dark tales. "And you?" Jackson's voice was low but not unkind, a quiet strength beneath the gruff exterior. "Ryra," she replied, her voice softening as the intensity of the moment slowly eased. Jackson gave a curt nod. "Nice to meet you, Ryra." The hum of the shuttle engines filled the space as silence settled once more. Ryra found herself stealing glances at him, her mind swirling with confusion. The stories she had heard didn't match the man sitting across from her. He was clearly dangerous, but not in the senselessly cruel way she had been taught to expect. His combat had been controlled, precise. He had protected her, fought to disable rather than kill. It was almost as if he had a code, a method to his violence. Her curiosity gnawed at her, and she couldn't help but ask, "Why did you help me?" Jackson finished cleaning his weapon, set it aside, and leaned back slightly against the wall. His eyes met hers, steady and piercing. "Why not?" "That's not an answer," Ryra pressed, frustration and confusion coloring her words. "You had no reason to. I'm not one of your kind. My people. We were taught to fear humans." Jackson let out a sigh, running a hand through his short, dark hair. "You've probably heard a lot of stories about us. Some of them are true. Most of them aren't. But I didn't help you because of who you are. I helped because it was the right thing to do." "The right thing to do," Ryra repeated, her disbelief clear. "But you didn't know me. For all you knew, I could have been dangerous." "Maybe," Jackson said with a shrug, "but I've seen enough in this galaxy to know that not every fight is about survival. Sometimes, you help because no one else will." His words left Ryra speechless. There was a depth to him she hadn't expected, a complexity that defied the stories of human savagery. Beneath the warrior exterior was a man who had lived through darkness and yet clung to a sense of morality, a code of honor. "Is that why you're out here?" she asked, treading carefully. "Helping people?" For a moment, Jackson's jaw tightened, and he glanced away, staring into the endless void of space outside the shuttle's cockpit. "Not exactly. I'm out here because it's the only place I belong anymore." The weight of his words hung between them, unspoken pain lurking beneath the surface. Ryra chose not to push further. Trust couldn't be forced, and whatever haunted Jackson was something he clearly wasn't ready to share. Instead, she steered the conversation elsewhere. "Where are we going?" she asked. Jackson leaned forward, activating a small holographic map on the console. "A neutral spaceport, a few light years from here. It's a safe place to lay low for a while. You can catch a transport there and figure out your next move." Ryra examined the map, the station a lonely relic orbiting a dead planet. It wasn't the most comforting destination, but it was better than being hunted. She nodded, accepting the plan. "And what about you?" she asked. "What will you do?" "I'll make sure you get there safely," Jackson replied without hesitation. "After that, I have my own business to take care of." A pang of uncertainty twisted in Ryra's chest. She barely knew this human, yet he had saved her life twice. The galaxy was vast and merciless, and she wasn't sure how she'd fare alone. Still, she managed a quiet, heartfelt, "Thank you." Jackson acknowledged her gratitude with a brief nod but said nothing more. He resumed cleaning his weapon, and Ryra sat back in her seat, her mind spinning from the whirlwind of events that had thrust them together. As the shuttle neared the neutral spaceport, its immense structure loomed into view, a sprawling, chaotic amalgamation of rings and docks teeming with ships from every corner of the galaxy. The station was a melting pot of species and cultures, a place where even syndicates had to tread carefully. Hope flickered in Ryra's chest. Finally, she might have a chance to rest, to plan, to think about a future beyond running. But as they approached the landing dock, a flicker of movement on the scanner wiped away her relief. "Jackson," she said, her voice tight with alarm. "There's a ship following us." Jackson's expression hardened as he examined the readings. "It's a syndicate scout. They must have tracked us." Ryra's heart sank. "What do we do?" Jackson's jaw clenched, and he grabbed his helmet, sliding it over his head. "Once we land, they'll come for us. Stay close and keep your head down. If they catch us here, we're both dead." Fear curled in Ryra's stomach, but she nodded, knowing she had no choice but to trust him. As the shuttle touched down, the engine's heavy thrum filled the air. Jackson moved swiftly, grabbing a satchel and strapping it across his chest. "Stay close," he repeated, his voice muffled but firm. Ryra followed him down the ramp, eyes darting nervously around the bustling docking bay. The chaotic swirl of activity provided some cover, but her focus zeroed in on the syndicate ship landing nearby. Mercenaries disembarked, weapons in hand, their predatory eyes scanning for prey. Jackson led her into the crowd, weaving through with practiced ease. Ryra's heart raced, each step feeling like a countdown. As they ducked into a narrow alley between two cargo bays, Jackson halted, his gaze sweeping the area. "We'll lose them in the market," he said. "It's crowded. They won't risk a shootout." Ryra's throat was dry with fear, but she nodded. She was about to respond when the air behind her grew heavy, a cold presence sending chills down her spine. She didn't need to turn to know they were in danger. A syndicate mercenary had found them. The syndicate mercenary stood motionless for a heartbeat, his reptilian eyes glowing menacingly in the pale light of the station's underbelly. Shadows played across his scaled face, emphasizing the predatory grin that curled his lips. Jackson didn't flinch, his cold, unyielding stare locked on his adversary. The silence between them thickened, the type of silence that shatters into violence. The mercenary's chuckle broke the stillness, mocking. "You humans are all the same," he sneered, his voice a guttural hiss. "You think you're invincible. But I know you're kind, soft on the inside. Easy to break." Jackson didn't react, but Ryra saw the muscles in his arm tense, his grip tightening around the hilt of his plasma blade. The air crackled with tension, a coiled spring ready to snap. Without warning, the syndicate lunged, claws cutting through the space where Jackson had been an instant before. Ryra's breath caught, fear knotting her stomach, but Jackson moved with deadly precision. He sidestepped, his plasma blade slashing upward, searing the mercenary's armored flank. Sparks flew as the blade met scaled armor, but the mercenary barely flinched, his roar of pain only fueling his fury. The syndicate retaliated, swinging his other massive arm in a wide arc. Jackson ducked low, barely avoiding the deadly swipe. Ryra's heart thundered as she watched the clash, the combatants locked in a brutal dance of speed and power. Jackson moved with relentless efficiency, aiming each strike with surgical precision, seeking weak points in the syndicate's armor. But the mercenary was relentless, his sheer size and strength pushing Jackson to his limits. Each near miss seemed to draw more effort from the human, and Ryra could see the strain beginning to wear on him. The syndicate's laughter echoed through the corridor, mocking. Fast, human, but not fast enough. Jackson offered no response, his focus unbreakable. He feinted left, then lunged right, his plasma blade slicing into the mercenary's leg. The syndicate howled, stumbling, but the momentary advantage wasn't enough. He recovered, his rage exploding into a charge. This time, Jackson couldn't dodge in time. The mercenary's claws raked across his chest, and the force of the blow sent him crashing into the wall. "Jackson!" Ryra screamed, her voice thick with terror. Jackson slumped to the ground, dazed. The mercenary loomed over him, claws raised for the final strike. Panic seized Ryra. "Do something," her mind screamed. Desperation flooded her, and before she knew it, she had snatched up a discarded metal rod. With every ounce of strength she could muster, she hurled it at the mercenary. The makeshift weapon struck the syndicate's head, not hard enough to injure but enough to startle. He hesitated, and that split second was all Jackson needed. Summoning his remaining strength, Jackson surged forward. His plasma blade ignited with a deadly hiss, and he drove it deep into the mercenary's exposed side. The syndicate convulsed, a strangled roar escaping his throat as the blade tore through his armor. Jackson twisted the weapon, ensuring the blow was lethal. The massive body shuddered once before collapsing, lifeless, to the cold metal floor. Jackson staggered to his feet, one hand pressed to the bleeding gash across his chest. He was breathing heavily, but his eyes remained sharp, his instincts still in survival mode. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice steady despite the pain lacing through it. Ryra's knees wobbled, the adrenaline still pulsing through her veins. "No," she managed to say, her voice trembling. "I'm fine." "Good." Jackson's voice was curt, but Ryra could see relief flickering in his eyes. "We need to move. More of them will come." Without waiting for her response, he turned and led the way down the corridor, his steps urgent despite his injuries. Ryra followed, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She had been seconds from death, and Jackson had saved her. Again. The image of him standing as her shield, risking his life, was burned into her mind. They found a quieter section of the station, a temporary respite from the chaos. Jackson leaned against the wall, catching his breath. He removed his helmet, sweat glistening on his scarred face. His chest heaved, but his eyes remained fierce, vigilant. "Thank you," Ryra said, her voice soft, almost fragile. Her gratitude wasn't just for saving her life. It was for shattering the image she had held of humans, cruel, ruthless beings. Jackson was something else, something that defied those tales. He glanced at her, brow furrowing slightly. "You don't owe me thanks," he replied, his voice rough but genuine. "Staying alive is enough for now." Ryra hesitated, uncertainty and awe mixing in her gaze. Humans had always been painted as monsters, creatures driven by instinct and violence. Yet Jackson had protected her, had fought not for glory or thrill but for duty. "I thought humans were different," she confessed, choosing her words carefully. "I've heard so many stories about how your kind is bloodthirsty, how you—" "Stories aren't always true," Jackson interrupted, his tone even. His gaze softened just a fraction. "We're not all the same. Some of us fight because we have to. Others fight because there's no other choice." Guilt pricked at Ryra. She had judged his entire species based on fear and rumors. But Jackson was living proof that humans were more complex, more honorable than she had ever imagined. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice laced with genuine curiosity. Jackson was silent, his expression guarded. Finally, he spoke, each word heavy with unspoken pain. "Because I know what it's like to be hunted." The gravity of his words settled between them. Ryra didn't push for more, sensing the raw wounds behind his answer. Trust, she realized, wasn't something that could be demanded. It had to be earned, and Jackson carried scars she couldn't yet understand. "We need to keep moving," he said, his tone regaining its urgency. "The syndicates won't stop until we're far from this station." Ryra nodded, her fear replaced by a fragile but growing respect for the human warrior. As they navigated the winding corridors toward an uncertain future, she couldn't shake the feeling that, in this galaxy filled with darkness, honor still burned brightly in people like Jackson. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was hope.